Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. The morning in the Donovan house began with the usual noise. The hiss of a frying pan, the knock of a knife on a cutting board, the slight hum of the coffee machine, which, as always, worked intermittently. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, and looked out the window. Behind the glass stretched their small yard, a neatly trimmed lawn, an old oak tree with a swing that Mark hung for her as a child. She had only returned home from college 2 days ago, but she could already feel the familiar smells and sounds enveloping her like an old blanket. Everything was the same as always. "Claire, are you with your head in the clouds again?" Mark's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. He stood at the sink, drying his hands with a towel. In his hands he held a small wooden horse, Claire's old toy, which she had not seen for 10 years. "I'm just thinking how strange it is to come home," she replied, sipping her tea. "Everything is so familiar, but I don't know, it's like I'm looking at it with different eyes." "That's because you're now an adult student," Mark winked. "Soon you will begin to teach us how to live. Look what I found in the basement yesterday. Do you remember her?" He raised the horse higher so Claire could see. The toy was shabby, the paint on the sides was peeling, and one ear was slightly broken off, but Claire recognized it immediately. This was the same horse that Mark had made for her when she was 6 years old. She adored horses, then she read books about them, drew them on every piece of paper. Mark, without hesitation, took a piece of wood and a knife and carved this figurine for her in a couple of evenings. Then they painted it together in the garage, and Claire still remembered how he laughed when she accidentally smeared paint on his nose. "Wow," Claire smiled, holding out her hand. "Did you save it?" "Of course." Mark handed her the toy. "It was lying in a box with your old drawings. I thought about fixing it. The ear has fallen off, but I'll glue it back on. It will be as good as new." "You're always fixing something," Claire said, turning the horse over in her hands. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "Even what, it would seem, can no longer be saved." "Well, I'm a mechanic," Mark shrugged, but a warm spark flashed in his eyes. "If something can be fixed, why throw it away? This is my principle." Claire nodded, feeling a warmth spread in her chest. Mark was like that, reliable, like the old truck he kept in the garage. He fixed everything: broken chairs, leaky faucets, her broken knees as a child. And herself, probably too, after her father, Andrew, died in that accident. She was only 5, and her memories of her father were as blurry as old photographs. But Mark came into their lives almost immediately after that, and since then he has been her rock. Not just a stepfather, but something more. "Pancakes are ready." Lauren's voice came from the stove, and Claire turned her head. The mother stood with her back to them, deftly flipping another pancake in the frying pan. She was wearing a blue apron, her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she smelled of vanilla and coffee. Lauren always made pancakes on Saturdays. It was a family tradition that Claire adored as a child. But now, looking at her mother, she noticed something strange. Lauren didn't turn to them, didn't look at Mark, even when he spoke. Her movements were sharp, almost mechanical. "Great, I'm dying of hunger." Mark walked up to the table, rubbing his hands. "Claire, how much should I give you?" "2, 3. 2 is enough," she answered, putting the horse on the table. "You know, I don't eat like you." "Hey, I'm in great shape." Mark patted his stomach, which, to be honest, was far from flat. "These are all muscles, just hidden under a layer of, experience." Claire laughed, and even Lauren seemed to smile a little, although she still didn't turn around. "Experience, huh?" Claire teased. "Is that what they call it now?" "That's right." Mark winked and sat down opposite her, pushing the plate towards her. "Lauren, will you be with us? Or will you eat standing up again, like a soldier on duty?" Lauren finally turned around, holding a stack of pancakes. Her face was calm, but Claire noticed how her gaze slid past Mark as if she was avoiding his eyes. She put the plate on the table and said, "I'll eat later. We need to make some more coffee. This car is acting up again." "Let me take a look," Mark suggested, already getting up. "Don't," Lauren waved her hand, and there was a hint of sharpness in her voice. "I'll figure it out myself. Sit down and eat." Mark froze for a second, then shrugged and sat back down. Claire looked at him, then at her mother. Something was wrong. Lauren usually didn't mind when Mark took on things around the house. She even joked that he was her personal jack of all trades. But today she seemed tense, like a taut string. "Well, how are things in college?" Mark changed the subject, helping himself to pancakes, still arguing with professors. "Sometimes," Claire smiled, grateful for his attempt to diffuse the atmosphere. "Last week, I proved to someone that he had interpreted Shakespeare incorrectly. He wasn't happy." "This is my girl," Mark laughed. "Never give up. All about me." "Are you?" Lauren finally sat down at the table, but her voice was dry. "She's more like Andrew. He also loved to argue to the last." There was silence. The name Andrew was rarely heard in this house. Claire knew that her mother didn't like to talk about the past. It was a closed topic, like an old book that no one opened. Mark coughed, cutting off a piece of pancake. "Well, of course him too," he said softly, "but stubbornness is definitely my upbringing." Claire looked at him gratefully. Mark always knew how to smooth corners. She picked up her fork and started to eat, but her eyes fell on Lauren again. The mother sat staring into her cup and was silent. Her fingers nervously fiddled with the edge of the napkin. "Mom, are you okay?" Claire asked, unable to stand it. "You're kind of, I don't know, quiet." Lauren looked up, and for a second Claire thought she saw a shadow flicker through them. But then the mother smiled tensely, but still smiled. "I'm just tired," she said. "I had a tough schedule at work. It's okay. Maybe you should take a day off," Mark suggested, looking at her with sincere concern. "I can call the car service, say that I'll be late, and we'll go somewhere. Just like old times." "No need," Lauren shook her head. "I can handle it, and you shouldn't miss work. You already have a lot of orders." Mark nodded, but Claire saw his shoulders sag slightly. He always tried to do something for the family, even if Lauren brushed him off. She suddenly remembered how as a child they went to the lake Mark taught her to fish, and Lauren sat on the shore with a book. Everything was simpler then, or so she thought. "By the way," Mark turned to Claire again, "I was thinking maybe we should go to the garage after breakfast. Let's see what we can do with this horse. I have glue and paint." "Seriously?" Claire perked up. "Like in the old days?" "Yeah," he smiled. "Only now will you hold the brush evenly and not smear my face." "I was a child." Claire was indignant, but could not contain her laughter. "It was an accident. An accident that took me a week to clean up." Mark shook his head, feigning a sigh. "Lauren, remember how she decorated me?" Lauren looked up, but her smile was weak. "Yes," she said quietly. "It was nice." And again silence. Claire looked at her mother, then at Mark. He noticed it too. She saw his eyebrows furrow slightly. But he didn't say anything. He just took another pancake and started spreading jam on it. "Well," Mark swallowed a bite, "what are your plans for the day, Claire, besides sitting and looking out the window?" "None yet," she shrugged. "Maybe I'll read it, or I'll help you in the garage." "Great," he nodded. "And you, Lauren, what do you have?" "Work," she answered briefly, standing up. "We need to stop by the hospital and check the schedule, and probably to the store." "Do you want me to go?" Mark suggested. "You won't have to carry bags." "No, I myself." Lauren was already taking off her apron. "You already do a lot." She went into the corridor, leaving them alone. Claire looked at Mark. He remained silent, looking at Lauren's empty plate. Then he sighed and said, "She's just tired. Happens." "Yes, I guess," Claire nodded, but there was no confidence in her voice. She picked up the horse again and ran her finger over the peeling paint. Mark noticed this and smiled. "Let's go," he said, getting up. "We'll fix it." just like before. Claire nodded, but her gaze lingered on the empty space where Lauren had just sat. Something was wrong. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it, like a slight chill running down her back. The day passed slowly. After breakfast, Mark went to the garage, promising that they would take care of the horse later, as someone called him, and Lauren got ready and left for the hospital, leaving a short goodbye. "I'll be back by lunch." The house emptied and Claire was left alone with a silence that seemed too loud. She sat on the sofa in the living room, leafing through a literature textbook, but Shakespeare's words slid past without catching her. Her thoughts kept returning to the morning, to the way Lauren avoided Mark's gaze, to her sharp "no need" when he offered to help. Something was wrong, and this feeling was gnawing at her from the inside, like a small but persistent animal. She sighed, slammed the book shut, and reached for her phone. "I had to send my friend, Abby, notes from the last lecture. She begged me to send it yesterday, but Claire forgot. Her own laptop was left in the room upstairs, and she was too lazy to go there. But on the kitchen table lay my mother's. Lauren never minded when Claire used it for little things like checking mail or printing assignments. 'Just don't touch my work files,' she usually said, but Claire had no intention of digging through her spreadsheets with shift schedules. She stood up, walked barefoot on the cold floor, and picked up her laptop. The screen blinked when she opened the lid and asked for a password. Claire entered it without hesitation. Claire 2005. Lauren didn't change it for years, and Claire always found it funny. "You could come up with something more complicated," she teased her mother, who just waved her off. "Who needs to hack a nurse?" The desktop loaded up the usual chaos of folders with names like work, accounts, and recipes. Claire connected her laptop to the Wi-Fi and opened her email to send the file to Abby. She had already attached the document and started typing a short message. "Here you go, no thanks," when a notification popped up in the right corner of the screen. A small window with a soft ping and a line of text. Claire glanced at it, about to close it, but her gaze caught on the name. TB. She froze. The cursor hovered over the send button, and my fingers froze on the keyboard. The notification was from an email client, and in a small preview, the first line of the letter was visible. "You looked amazing yesterday." Claire frowned. Who is TB? She didn't know anyone with those initials. Maybe Lauren's colleague or someone from the hospital. But the tone of the message, "she looked amazing," did not sound like work correspondence. It was something personal, too personal. Her heart beat a little faster. She knew she shouldn't do this. It was someone else's letter, my mother's letter, and going through it was like rummaging through her bag or reading a diary. But curiosity, mixed with some vague anxiety, was already tugging at her hand. She glanced at the door, as if Lauren might burst in at any second, and clicked on the notification. The mailbox opened. The letter was short, but every word burned into her mind like a shard of glass. "You looked amazing yesterday in that blue dress. Can't stop thinking about you. When will I see you again? Your TB." Claire blinked and read it again. Blue dress. She remembered how Lauren had gone to a meeting with colleagues yesterday. That's what she had told Mark. She was indeed wearing a blue dress, the same one that she rarely wore, only on special occasions. Claire then thought it was too dressy for a hospital meeting, but Lauren waved it off. "I want to look decent." And Mark, as always, simply nodded without asking questions. She swallowed, feeling her throat go dry. It could be anything. Maybe just a friendly compliment. Maybe she misunderstood. But at the bottom of the letter, there was a file attached, a small photo icon. Claire knew she shouldn't open it. It was too much. It was an invasion. But her hand itself reached out to the mouse, and it clicked. The photo loaded slowly, as if the laptop was deliberately stalling for time, giving her a chance to change her mind. And then the screen filled with an image, and Claire felt her heart sink somewhere down. Lauren was in the photo. Her mother, in that same blue dress, stood in an embrace with a man. He was tall, with dark hair and light stubble, wearing an expensive jacket. They were standing outside a restaurant. Claire recognized the sign. It was a place downtown that served steaks for $30. Lauren smiled. Her hand lay on the man's shoulder, and he looked at her with a look that Claire could not confuse with anything. It was not a friendly look. It was something more. Claire froze, staring at the screen. Her breathing became uneven, and a swarm of thoughts began to swirl in her head. Who is this man? Why is he hugging her mom? Why does he write such letters to her? And why is Lauren, her mother, who was with Mark for 15 years, standing here with that TB, smiling in a way that Claire hasn't seen her smile at home? No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, that's not what I'm thinking about. This can't be. She tried to find an explanation, but there was none. Her hands trembled. She wanted to close her laptop and forget what she saw, but she couldn't look away. It was like a blow, like a crack in glass that was about to spread further. She knew her mother, or thought she did. Lauren wasn't perfect. Yes, she could be cold and distant, but cheating. Deceive Mark, who was with her all these years, who raised Claire as his daughter. It didn't fit in my head. Claire, are you crazy? She said out loud to herself, her voice trembling. It's none of your business. Close it. Just close it. But instead, she scrolled up the letter, checking the date. Yesterday. The letter was sent last night at 11:47 p.m. Lauren returned home around midnight and said she was late to work. Claire was already asleep by then, but Mark was waiting for her. She heard him quietly ask, "Is everything okay?" And Lauren replied, "Yes, I'm just tired." And he believed. She leaned back in her chair, pressing her palms to her face. Her heart was beating so hard that it felt like it was going to jump out of her chest. This was wrong. It was impossible. This shouldn't have happened. But the proof was there in front of her, glowing on the screen, and she couldn't ignore it. What should I do? She whispered, looking at the photo. What should I do now? She reached for the mug of tea that stood nearby to take a sip and calm down, but her hand was shaking too much. The mug slid off the edge of the table and fell to the floor. A loud crash broke the silence, and Claire winced as she watched the shards fly across the kitchen. The tea spread into a dark puddle, soaking into the tiles, and she sat frozen, eyes wide open. She knew she couldn't pretend she didn't see anything. Not only the mug broke, but also something inside it, and she had no idea whether her father would be able to fix it if he found out the truth. Claire slowly stood up, grabbed a paper towel, and began to wipe up the puddle, but her movements were mechanical. Her thoughts were somewhere far away. She didn't send Abby's notes, didn't close the laptop. She just sat there looking at the pieces and trying to figure out what to do next. Her heart was still pounding, but now mixed with the shock was something else, an anguish, deep and inexplicable. She closed her eyes, and her memory, like an old projector, began to play frames from the past in front of her. She was 6, maybe 7. Summer, heat, the smell of cut grass in the yard. She stood in the driveway, clutching the handlebars of her bicycle red, with white stripes on the frame. The wheels were shaking because she was afraid to let go of Mark's hands, who were holding the saddle from behind. Her knees were already bruised from previous falls, but he was not angry and did not rush. "You can do it, Claire," he said, his voice low and calm, like the hum of the engine in his garage. "Just pedal, I won't let go." And she twisted, at first hesitantly, then faster, feeling the wind hitting her face. And then she suddenly realized that she was driving herself. Mark stood to the side, smiling, and she screamed with delight. "Dad, look, look!" She didn't remember when she started calling him Daddy, but the word stuck to him naturally, like paint to that wooden horse. Claire opened her eyes, and the corners of her lips twitched into a faint smile. Mark was there, always. Not just a stepfather, but something more. She remembered the nights when she had nightmares, dark, confused dreams where she was running after someone she couldn't catch. Maybe for Andrew, whom she barely remembered. She would wake up in tears, and Mark would come, sit on the edge of the bed, and stroke her head. "It's okay, baby," he whispered. "I'm here." Sometimes he brought a glass of water. Sometimes he told stupid stories about the cars he fixed until she fell asleep again. Lauren never came. Claire heard her mother grumbling from the bedroom. "Mark, she's already big. Let her handle it herself." But he still got up. Lauren was always somewhere at a distance. Not cold, no, she could hug Claire, cook her favorite pancakes, but these gestures did not contain the warmth that Claire felt from Mark. The mother was like a shadow present, but elusive. Claire remembered drawing pictures for her as a child: flowers, a house, a family of three figures. Lauren smiled and said, "Beautiful," but immediately put the drawings away in a drawer, as if she didn't need them. And Mark hung them on the refrigerator, even the crooked ones, and boasted to the neighbors, "My Claire is an artist." She stood up from the floor, throwing the towel on the table, and walked towards the living room. There was a frame on the mantelpiece, an old photograph of Andrew. Her biological father looked at her seriously, in his fireman's uniform, with a slight smile. Claire knew him only from stories and these photographs. He died when she was 5, in an accident that Lauren barely talked about. "He was a hero," my mother repeated, but her voice always sounded empty, like a memorized line. Claire looked at the photo, and something sank in her chest. Mark was able to replace her father. He took her past what Andrew left behind and made it his. He not only entered their lives, he became their anchor, the one who held them when everything was shaking. And now, after what she saw on the screen, that anchor seemed threatened. If Lauren is deceiving him, if that photo is true, what will happen to him? With them? The garage door creaked and Mark walked in, wiping his hands on a rag. His shirt was stained with oil, but he was smiling as always. "Claire, are you still sitting here?" he asked, throwing the rag on the table. "I thought you'd already run off to your friends." She forced herself to smile, although her lips trembled. "I will go shopping," she lied, trying to speak evenly. "We need to take something for college. Paper, pens, everything. Do you want me to give you a ride?" Mark reached for the keys on the hook. "I still need to go to the spare parts store." "No," she answered too quickly, and he raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That is, myself. I want to take a walk. Think along the way." "Okay," he shrugged, but a shadow of concern flashed in his eyes. "Just don't stay out too late, okay? And call if anything happens." "Of course, Dad." Claire. She grabbed her backpack, stuffed her phone and keys into it, and ran out the door before he could ask anything else. It was cool outside. The wind was tugging at her hair. She opened the taxi app and called a cab, tapping her foot nervously as she waited. Her plan was simple, but no less crazy. She would go to the hospital where Lauren worked and meet her after her shift. Lauren finished at 6. Claire knew her schedule by heart. She didn't mean to make a scene or ask questions. All she had to do was look. Make sure that photo is a misunderstanding, that her mother is not who she seems. But deep down, she already felt that hope was a thin thread ready to break. The taxi arrived 5 minutes later, an old gray sedan with shabby seats. The driver, an elderly man with a thick mustache, muttered, "Where?" Claire gave the address of the hospital, leaned back in her seat, and stared out the window. Her heart was pounding, and her fingers fiddled with the strap of her backpack. "You're doing something stupid," a voice whispered in my head. "Stop." But she couldn't. Not after that letter, not after that smile. The trip took 15 minutes. The hospital appeared ahead, a white building with a red sign, surrounded by a parking lot. Claire paid, pulled up the hood of her sweatshirt, and walked out, taking up a position across the street at the coffee shop. She bought a latte so as not to look suspicious and stood by the window, pretending to scroll through her phone. The clock showed 5:50, 10 more minutes. She waited, clutching the glass until her fingers turned white. People came and went from the hospital: doctors, patients, nurses. At 6:03, Claire saw her. Lauren emerged from the main entrance wearing a blue apron and a light coat, with a bag slung over her shoulder. She looked as usual, but Claire held her breath, waiting for her mother to go to their Ford. But Lauren stopped at the curb, looking down the road. A black sedan pulled up a minute later, shiny, obviously expensive. Claire tensed, her fingers crushed the glass, and the lid cracked. Lauren got into the car. Claire didn't see the driver clearly, but she caught a glimpse of dark hair and a jacket, the same one from the photo. It was him. "TB." "No," Claire whispered, her voice drowned in the noise of the street. She threw the coffee into the trash can and waved her hand, calling for a taxi, which was just dropping off a passenger nearby. The driver, a young guy with headphones, nodded when she said, "Follow that black car, please." He cast a curious glance at her, but didn't ask anything, just moved off. The sedan drove ahead, turning towards the city center. Claire sat in the back seat, clutching her backpack, her breathing uneven. The taxi driver was silent, only occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror. She tried to stay calm, but everything was boiling inside. "It's a mistake," she repeated to herself. "It's not what I think." But every turn of the car ahead undermined her faith. 10 minutes later, the sedan turned toward the Rose Inn motel. Her stomach lurched when the car stopped at one of the numbers. "Slow down here," she told the taxi driver, her voice trembling. He stopped across the road, by the side of the road, and turned off the engine. Claire watched her mom get out of the car, straightening her coat. Behind her is a man, tall in that jacket, with a confident gait. He said something and Lauren laughed shortly, but lightly, like Claire hadn't heard at home. They entered the room, the door closed, and Claire's world collapsed. She sat in the taxi, shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks, hot and salty. The driver cleared his throat, but she didn't turn around. Her hand reached for the phone and turned on the camera. She pointed the lens at the motel at that door. Her fingers trembled, the image jumped, but she pressed record. A few seconds Lauren and the man enter, the door slams. Then she switched to the photo, took off the sign, the car, and the room number. Sobs burst from her throat, but she did not stop. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you, Mom?" Tears blurred her eyes, but she continued to film, as if this could prove something. The phone slipped from her hands, fell onto the seat, and Claire pressed her palms to her face. Her body was shaken by sobs, deep and silent, as if someone had torn her heart out of her. She saw Mark, his smile at breakfast, his hands with that horse, his voice, "Call me if anything happens." And now this. Lauren with a strange man in a motel. It was a betrayal not just of Mark, but of her, their family, everything she loved. "Hey, are you okay?" The taxi driver's voice pulled her out of her stupor. He looked in the mirror, frowning. "Yes," she lied, wiping her face with her sleeve. "Just take me home." She gave the address, the driver nodded and started the car. Claire picked up the phone, the recording was saved. Tears fell onto the screen, and she whispered again, "How could you? How could you?" Claire sat on the edge of the bed in her room, clutching her phone in her hands. The taxi dropped her off at the house half an hour ago, and she snuck inside quietly so Mark wouldn't hear. He was still in the garage. She could see the light in the window and hear the faint clink of tools. What should she do? Should I tell Mark? Keep silent. Should I talk to Lauren? Each option seemed unbearable. Her fingers trembled as she opened her contacts and found the name Abby. Her friend was her lifeline in college, the one who always knew what to say, even in her darkest moments. Claire pressed call, raised the phone to her ear, and held her breath. The beeps went on endlessly, and with each one she wanted to hang up more and more. But then there was a click, and Abby's voice, a little sleepy but warm, burst into the silence. "Claire, why are you calling so early? Is it already midnight there?" "Abby," Claire's voice broke, and she covered her mouth with her hand to keep from sobbing. I need to talk." "Hey, what happened?" Abby immediately perked up. The sleep disappeared from her tone. "Are you okay? Are you crying?" I don't know." Claire swallowed, feeling the tears welling up again. "I saw something. About Mom, and I don't know what to do." Wait. Abby rustled something in the background, apparently sitting down. "What did you see? Tell me normally. I don't understand anything." Claire took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Her voice trembled, but she agreed to tell everything. "I don't know what to do with this." There was silence on the other end. Claire could only hear Abby's faint breathing, and the pause seemed like an eternity. "Oh my God, Claire," her friend finally breathed. "Are you serious? This is just crazy." "Are you sure it was?" "Well, what you think it was." Yes, Claire clenched the phone until her knuckles turned white. She laughed with him. They entered the room together. This is more than just friendship, Abby. I'm not stupid. Okay, okay, Abby spoke faster, as if trying to calm her down. Look, this is terrible, I understand. But, what are you going to do? You're not going to run to your stepfather with this now, are you? I don't know. Claire closed her eyes, feeling dizzy. I want to tell him. He should know. But, this will break him, Abby. You don't understand what he is like. But damn, he doesn't deserve it. Claire, wait. Abby's voice became firmer. You're emotional right now. If you tell him, it will blow everything up. Your family, your mom, everything. Maybe this is a one-time mistake. Maybe you should talk to her first. Should I talk? Claire almost shouted, but then lowered her voice, remembering Mark. How do I talk to her? Hey, Mom, I saw you go into a hotel with some guy. Can you explain? I don't know, Abby said. But if you tell Mark, there's no turning back. Think about it. Are you sure you want this? Maybe it's better to keep quiet for now. Find out more? Claire fell silent, her breathing heavy. Silence. How could she remain silent when she saw it with her own eyes? But the thought of telling Mark squeezed her heart like a vice. She imagined his face, his kind eyes, his street fish, and how they will go out when he finds out. I can't remain silent, she finally whispered. This is impossible. Claire, listen to me, Abby sighed. I know you're hurt, but give yourself time. Don't do anything rashly. Please. Claire nodded, even though Abby couldn't see her, and hung up. She threw the phone on the bed and fell face first into the pillow. Claire lay on the bed, curled up under the covers, although she was not cold. Her eyes were red from crying, and Abby's voice was still ringing in her head. Give yourself time. But time didn't help, it only intensified the pain she carried inside after what she saw at the motel. The door of the room creaked quietly, and she heard Mark's footsteps. She pulled the blanket higher, hoping he wouldn't notice her face. Claire? His voice was soft, as always. I was thinking, maybe we should go to the garage. We'll fix that horse, as promised. She turned her head, meeting his gaze. Mark stood in the doorway, in his threadbare shirt, with a slight smile, but his eyes narrowed when he saw her pale, with swollen eyelids. What's wrong with you, baby? He stepped closer, frowning. You look bad. Are you sick? Claire swallowed, trying to force a smile. Yeah, I guess, she lied, looking away. I just don't feel well. That's not the point. Mark shook his head and left, saying, I'll be right back. A couple of minutes later, he returned with a mug of hot tea. She smelled of honey and chamomile, just like when she was a child, when he gave her this if she had a cold. He sat down on the edge of the bed and held out the mug. Drink, he said. Remember how you got sick at 12. I lay there with a fever, and I read to you about cars until you fell asleep. Claire took the tea, her fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic. She smiled faintly. Yes, you also brought me that old magazine about trucks, she said quietly. Claire nodded, feeling the tears welling up again. Mark was always there, not Lauren, but him. She took a sip of tea, hiding her face behind the mug so that he would not notice her trembling lips. Rest, he said, standing up. If it gets worse, tell me. I'm here. He left, leaving the door ajar. Claire leaned back on the pillow, her heart aching at his concern and at what she was hiding. She couldn't tell him. I couldn't yet. The hours passed slowly, and it was already dark when the front door slammed. Lauren returned 2 hours later than usual. Claire heard her steps below, Mark's voice. Lauren, go see Claire and see how she is. It seems she caught some kind of virus. I'm worried. Okay, Lauren answered shortly, her tone tired, almost annoyed. Claire tensed when her mother entered the room. Lauren looked as usual, her coat was off, her hair was disheveled, but there was something cold in her eyes. She stood by the bed, crossing her arms. Mark said you feel bad, she began. What's wrong with you? Claire looked at her, and all the pain that had been accumulating inside burst out. She threw off the blanket and sat up, her voice trembling. I saw you. Today, with him, at the motel. Lauren froze. Her face turned stony, but she did not look away. Were you following me? She asked quietly, but there was steel in her tone. Yes, Claire clenched her fists. I saw how you laughed with him. How did you get there? How could you, Mom? How could you do this to Mark? Lauren was silent for a second, then her lips pressed into a thin line. Shut up. You don't know what it's like to be me, she said coldly. Mark is good, but I need more. You're still a child, Claire. You won't understand. Don't you dare say anything to Mark. I'll figure it out myself. Claire jumped out of bed, her eyes burning with tears and rage. More? She shouted. And I needed a father. Mark was that to me, and you. You're betraying him. You're betraying us. Lauren stepped back, her face contorted in a mixture of guilt and anger. She opened her mouth to say something, but instead spun around, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Claire was left alone, her scream hanging in the air, and the tears flowed again. The next morning at the Donovan house began with deceptive silence. Claire woke up to the sound of a sizzling frying pan and the faint aroma of coffee coming through the crack under the door of her room. She lay staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of yesterday pressing on her chest. She didn't sleep almost all night, falling into an uneasy half-sleep, then opening her eyes again to make sure it wasn't a nightmare. But it was reality, and there was no escape from it. Claire slowly crawled out of bed, pulled on her sweatshirt, and went downstairs. Her feet walked down the wooden steps with a quiet creak, and every sound seemed louder than usual. In the kitchen, Lauren stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the same mechanical precision she always did. She was wearing the same blue apron, her hair was in a bun, and she looked normal. Too normal. It was as if yesterday's conversation, the screams, accusations, tears didn't happen at all. Claire froze in the doorway, her fingers tightening on the frame. This was wrong. It was a sham. Mark was sitting at the table, leafing through a newspaper, his mug of coffee smoking next to him. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Good morning, baby," he said, pushing back his chair. "How are you? You look better than yesterday." Claire forced herself to nod, even as her throat tightened at his words. He didn't know. He sat here with that warm smile of his and didn't know. "Morning," she managed, sitting down opposite him. Her gaze slid to Lauren, who didn't even turn around. "Yes, a little better." "That's good." Mark folded the newspaper and reached for the pancakes that Lauren had just put on the table. "I thought I'd have to call a doctor. You were like a ghost yesterday." Lauren finally turned around, holding the coffee pot. Her face was calm, almost serene, but Claire noticed how her fingers gripped the handle a little tighter. She put the coffee pot on the table and said, "Yes, you scared us, Claire. It's good that it's not a virus. Just overtiredness, probably." Claire looked at her, feeling anger boiling inside her. Overwork. Was that all she could say after yesterday? After slamming the door and leaving her alone with this pain? She opened her mouth to say something, but thought better of it. Not under Mark. Not now. Instead, she took the pancake and slowly began to spread the jam on it, her movements harsh, almost aggressive. "Maybe," she said, looking at Lauren, "or maybe it's because I saw too much yesterday." Lauren froze for a second, her eyes meeting Claire's. A shadow flashed through them, not guilt, but irritation. But she quickly turned away, pouring herself some coffee. "You came back late." Mark didn't notice anything. His voice was light. "Shopping, huh? Did you manage to take everything?" "Not really." Claire didn't take her eyes off Lauren. "I went for one, but came across another. Something unexpected." Lauren coughed, her movements becoming a little harsher. She put the coffee pot back on the stove and picked up the plate, but didn't sit down with them. Claire saw her mother tense up, but continued to play her role, the role of a caring wife and mother who was simply tired of work. "Well, the main thing is that you're feeling better now," Mark smiled, taking a bite of the pancake. "Lauren, sit with us. Will you eat standing up again? I have a lot to do." Lauren waved her hand. Her voice was even, but Claire sensed the coldness in it. We need to call the hospital to clarify the schedule. You came back late yesterday. Claire tilted her head. Her tone was innocent, but her words were sharp. Work delayed you. Lauren looked at her, and this time her gaze was firm, almost warning. Yes, she answered briefly. The shift was delayed. Happens. It happens, Claire repeated, drawing out the word. Sometimes people linger where you don't expect them. Is it true? Mark raised his eyebrows, looking from Claire to Lauren. What are you talking about? He asked, frowning slightly. Did I miss something? Nothing. Lauren quickly shook her head, her smile strained. Claire is just joking. She's in that mood. Yeah, Claire leaned back in her chair, clutching her fork. Kidding. I just remembered how yesterday someone laughed. Very loud. Lauren pursed her lips, her hand trembling as she placed the plate on the table. Mark didn't notice anything. He had already returned to his newspaper, muttering something about the weather. But Claire saw how her mother tensed, how her cheeks turned slightly red. She knew Lauren got the hint, and it was a small victory, subtle but sharp, like a needle. You should eat, Mom. Claire added jam to the pancake. Her voice was sweet, almost poisonous. Otherwise, you're probably tired after such a long shift. I'll eat later. Lauren turned to the sink, her back straight as a board. I have no appetite. Strange, Claire shrugged. I thought you'd be hungry after yesterday. So much. Activity. Mark put the newspaper down, looking at her with slight surprise. Claire, you're kind of prickly today, he said, smiling. Did something happen? No, Dad. She looked at him, and her voice softened. I'm just thinking about everything. Lauren turned sharply, her eyes flashing. That's enough, Claire, she said quietly but firmly. Eat and don't think about it. I'm not making this up. Claire met her gaze, her heart pounding. I'm just saying what I see. There was silence. Mark coughed, clearly feeling the tension, but not understanding the reason for it. Okay, girls, he raised his hands like a peacemaker. Let's not make any riddles. I'm too old for this. Lauren snorted, but didn't say anything. She took the phone and walked out into the hallway, leaving Claire and Mark alone. Claire watched her leave, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Lauren pretended nothing happened, but Claire couldn't do it. Take out. Her every hint was like a blow, like an attempt to break through this wall of lies that her mother had erected around herself. Are you sure you're okay? Mark leaned toward her, his voice soft. You're somehow not like yourself. I'm fine, Dad. Claire forced a smile, but her eyes were wet. I'm just tired. He nodded, but she saw that he didn't believe it. Mark returned to his coffee, and Claire remained sitting, listening to the noise of the empty house. Lauren was calling somewhere, her voice coming muffled from the corridor. The day passed slowly. After a morning breakfast full of hints and forced smiles, Claire went to her room, closing the door. She could no longer sit with Lauren, look at her feigned calm, listen to her voice, which sounded as if nothing had happened. Every sound, the clatter of dishes, Mark's steps, the rustle of a newspaper cut her like a knife. She lay on the bed, clutching her pillow, trying to figure out what to do. Abby said to be quiet, but the silence was unbearable. It choked her like smoke that she could not exhale. By evening, Lauren got ready for her shift. Claire could hear her mother fiddling around downstairs, the jingle of keys, the rustle of a coat, a short conversation with Mark. I'll be back late, don't wait up, Lauren said, and her voice was as dry as the autumn leaves outside the window. Mark muttered something in response, and the door slammed. The car started, the headlights flashed across the yard, and the house fell silent again. Claire stood up, walked to the window, and watched the red lights of the Ford disappear around the corner. Her heart was pounding. This was her chance. She knew she couldn't keep it to herself much longer. She walked downstairs, her sneakers clicking softly on the steps. Mark was sitting on the porch. She could see his silhouette through the glass door. He was holding a mug of coffee, steam rising in the cold evening air, and next to him lay the very wooden horse that he had promised to fix. Claire stopped, her hand hovering on the door handle. She could turn back, pretend she didn't know anything, and preserve this fragile peace. But she could not remain silent. The door creaked and Mark turned around. His face lit up with a soft smile, but there was something tired in his eyes. "Claire," he said, patting the next step. "Come here, sit with me. It's cold, but the stars are beautiful." She nodded, her throat tightening. She went out onto the porch and sat down next to him, pulling her knees to her chest. The air was pungent and smelled of fallen leaves and smoke from a neighbor's fire. Mark was silent, looking at the sky, and Claire felt her hands shaking. She clenched them into fists, hiding them in the sleeves of her sweatshirt, but the trembling did not go away. It wasn't cold. It was the truth that was breaking out. "Dad," she began, her voice quiet, almost a whisper, "I need to tell you something." Mark turned his head, his eyebrows raised slightly. "Is it something serious?" he asked, putting down the mug. "Did you have a fight with the professor again?" "No," she shook her head, her eyes shining with the tears she was trying to hold back. "It's about Mom." He frowned, his smile slowly fading. "About Lauren?" he asked again. "What's wrong with her?" Claire swallowed, feeling the words catch in her throat. She looked at him, at his kind eyes, at the wrinkles around them, at his simple, reliable figure, and understood that now everything would change. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Her voice trembled, and she looked down at her hands. "She's cheating on you." Silence fell on the porch like a stone into water. Mark froze, his breathing getting a little louder, but he didn't say anything. Claire looked up, and her heart sank. He looked into emptiness, straight ahead, into the darkness of the yard, where the swing swayed slightly in the wind. His face was motionless, but there was something in it, not anger, not shock, but deep, silent pain. "Dad," Claire reached out to him, her voice trembling more. "I saw her. Yesterday. She went with some man to a motel. I filmed it, I have proof. I couldn't remain silent." He slowly turned his head, his gaze meeting hers. There was so much pain in his eyes, but he didn't ask a single question. Instead, he nodded, barely noticeably, as if confirming something to himself. He looked at her, then back into the darkness. His hand, which was lying on his knee, clenched into a fist, but he immediately unclenched it, as if he had forced himself to relax. Claire was expecting a scream, a question, anything, but he just sat there, and that silence was the worst of all. She felt her words hanging in the air, heavy, irreversible, like stones that could not be lifted back. "Dad, say something," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please." He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. Then he stood up, slowly, as if it was difficult for him to move. The mug remained on the step, the horse on the railing. He looked at Claire, and there was something in his eyes that she couldn't understand, a mixture of pain, fatigue, and maybe gratitude. "I need to think," he said quietly. "I'll be in the garage." He turned and walked away, his steps heavy but steady. The garage door creaked, the lights inside turned on, and Claire was left alone on the porch. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling not from the cold, but from what she had just done. The words she said could not be taken back. They hung between them like a crack in glass, and she knew that this crack would grow. She sat looking into the darkness, tears streaming down her face, but she did not wipe them away. Her thoughts were spinning about Mark, about how he felt, about the way he stared into space. She destroyed his world, but she could not do otherwise. He deserved the truth, even if that truth was a knife. Claire picked up Mark's mug, still warm, and pressed it to her chest. The garage was like a second home for Mark, his little refuge, where it smelled of oil, metal, and old wood. The ceiling lamp hummed, casting a soft light on a workbench littered with tools. He closed the door behind him, and the click of the lock sounded louder than usual. Claire's words, "Mom is cheating on you," still rang in his head like the echo of a distant blow. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the cold air of the garage penetrate his lungs. His world collapsed, not loudly, not with shouts, but quietly, like an old house that collapses under the weight of years. He didn't know what to say to Claire there on the porch, when her voice was trembling and her eyes were shining with tears. He didn't know how to respond to this truth that she laid out in front of him. So he went there, to the garage, where he always found answers. But today there were no answers. He sat down on an old chair, worn and creaking, and closed his eyes. The memory pulled him back like an old movie he hadn't seen in years. He remembered the day he first met Lauren. He was 35, she was 25, a frail girl with tired eyes and little Claire clinging to her hand. It was in a cafe on the outskirts of the city. He went to drink coffee after a shift at a car service, and she was sitting at the table, looking into an empty cup. Claire, a 5-year-old with pigtails, was doodling on a napkin. Mark was not going to interfere, but her look not desperate, but simply lonely caught him. He himself was alone then, after the death of his parents, with their old house and work, which barely kept him afloat. "Nice drawing," he said, nodding toward Claire's napkin just to start the conversation. Lauren smiled weakly but warmly and replied, "She likes to draw." That's how it all started. They got to talking, he treated them to a pie, and a week later he was already repairing her old Ford, which was stalling on every corner. Lauren and Claire became his life not immediately, but gradually, like rain filling cracks in the ground. He loved them both with all his heart. Mark opened his eyes, his gaze falling on an old photograph taped to the wall of the garage. Him, Lauren, and Claire at the lake about 10 years ago. Claire, laughing, holding a fishing rod, Lauren, sitting on a blanket with a book. He then dreamed that they would have another child. He saw it so clearly, a little boy or girl running around the yard, calling him Daddy. He told Lauren about this one evening when they were lying in bed. She was silent for a long time, and then turned to him. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I don't want any more children, Mark. What if something happens to you like it did to Andrew? I won't survive this again." He understood. Andrew, her first husband who died in that accident, was the shadow she carried with her. Mark didn't argue, didn't push. He accepted it because they already had Claire, a bright, funny girl who became everything to him. He remembered the day she first called him Daddy. She was 6, they were painting that same horse in the garage, and she, all smeared with paint, looked at him and said, "Dad, look, I made her a tail." Mark froze, his heart jumped, and he smiled so widely that his cheeks hurt. He was the happiest man in the world at that moment. But now, sitting in the garage, he tried to understand when everything went wrong. He ran his hand over his face, feeling the stubble under his fingers. What did he miss? He did everything a man should do. He loved Lauren, maybe not as passionately as in the first years, but deeply, reliably. He supported her when she was studying to become a nurse, when she was tired after her shifts, when she cried at night, thinking that he was sleeping. He took care of the house, brought money, fixed everything that was broken. Yes, the passion subsided over the years, he noticed it. Their evenings became quieter, their conversations shorter, and their bed just a place to sleep. But he thought it was normal that this happens when the years go by. He knew that he was no longer so young, gray hair at the temples, a back that ached after work. Maybe she's tired of this. From its simplicity, from its predictability. Mark stood up, went to the shelf, and took out the old tin can where he kept the nails. He fingered them just to keep his hands busy. He and Lauren had a secret that Claire didn't know about. There have been betrayals before. Once when Claire was 12 and had a fever. Mark then sat with her, changed cold compresses, and read to her about trucks until she fell asleep. And Lauren returned late, with the smell of someone else's perfume and a guilty look. He noticed, asked, and she admitted colleague, party, too much wine. "It was one time, Mark," she swore, crying. "I love you, it won't happen again." He forgave, because he loved her, because I didn't want to break what they had built. He hid this pain deeply and moved on. But now he understood that it didn't happen just once. Mark put the can back, his hands shaking. He was Lauren's rock, the stability, the person who kept their family afloat. And now that Claire has grown up, she no longer needs him. Apparently, she was looking for something else, passion, novelty, something that he, with his threadbare shirts and tired hands, could no longer give. It was bittersweet, but not as dramatic as he expected. It was simply the truth, cold and clear, like the autumn air outside the door. He returned to the workbench, picked up the horse, and ran his finger over its broken ear. Claire told the truth because she loved him. She didn't want him to live a lie, and he was grateful to her for this, even if this gratitude was mixed with pain. Mark opened the drawer, took out glue, and began to repair the toy slowly, carefully, as he repaired everything in his life. Morning arrived at the Donovan house with gray light filtering through the curtains. Claire did not sleep almost all night after talking with Mark on the porch. Her thoughts were spinning like autumn leaves in the wind. She was sitting in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea, when the front door slammed. Lauren's footsteps echoed down the hallway, tired but quick, as if she was in a hurry to get rid of her coat and bag. Claire tensed, her fingers gripping the mug tighter. She didn't want to see her mother, didn't want to hear her voice, but knew that a collision was inevitable. Lauren walked into the kitchen, her hair disheveled and shadows under her eyes. She looked exhausted, but her movements had the same cool confidence as always. She threw her bag on the chair and looked at Claire, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Where is Mark?" she asked, her voice harsh, without greeting. "His car is not in the yard." Claire looked up, meeting her mother's gaze. Her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to speak calmly, although every word was laced with poison. "I think he went to see a lawyer," she said in a drawl. "I guess he finally decided to do something." Lauren froze, her hand reaching for the coffee pot, stopping in midair. She turned slowly, her face turning stony. "What did you say?" she asked quietly, but there was a threat in her tone. "I said he probably went to see a lawyer," Claire repeated, her voice wavering, but she didn't look away. "After what I told him yesterday, it would be logical, don't you think?" Lauren pursed her lips and her eyes narrowed. She stepped closer, resting her hands on the table, leaning towards Claire. "Did you tell him?" She hissed. "Did you really do this?" "Yes." Claire jumped out of her chair, her voice shaking with anger. "I told him because he deserves to know. Do you think I could remain silent, seeing how you laugh with this? With this, TB, while he is here fixing your life?" Lauren straightened up, her face paling, but she didn't look away. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said coldly. "You're a child, Claire. You don't know what marriage is, what life is. I'm tired of explaining to you." "Tired?" Claire almost screamed, her tears welling up again, but she held them back. "And I'm tired of your lies. Do you think it's okay, a motel, a stranger, while Dad is waiting for you at home?" Lauren snorted, brushing it off as if Claire's words were empty words. "You're being too dramatic," she said, turning to the stove. "I'll handle this. Where is he now?" "I told you," Claire clenched her fists. "I think from a lawyer, and I hope he files for divorce, because you deserve it." Lauren froze, her back tense. She turned around slowly, her eyes flashing with anger, but she didn't say anything. She simply grabbed her phone and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Claire alone. The door to the corridor slammed, and the house fell silent again. Claire collapsed into her chair, her breathing coming in ragged gasps. She didn't know where Mark really was, but her words were not just a guess, it was her desire, her hope. She wanted him to leave Lauren, to free him from these lies. Meanwhile, Mark was actually driving down the highway, his old pickup truck buzzing at every turn. He didn't sleep after he went to the garage. He sat there all night, fixing that horse, sorting out the nails, looking at the photograph on the wall. Claire's words swirled around in his head, mingling with memories of Lauren, how she swore the cheating had happened once in the past. He was ready to forgive once, but twice this is like adult films of voluntary cuckolded husband. He didn't tell Claire where he was going. "I just got up at dawn, took the keys, and left." His old friend, Jack, was a lawyer not the most famous in the city, but reliable. Mark called him before the sun rose, and Jack, hearing his voice, did not ask unnecessary questions. "Come," he said, and Mark drove off. Jack's office was in the city center, in an old building. Mark parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a minute, looking at his hands on the steering wheel. They were rough, stained with oil, with small scars from work. These hands built their family, they repaired Claire's house, car, toys. But they couldn't keep Lauren. He sighed, got out of the pickup, and walked up the creaky stairs. Jack met him at the door short, bald and wearing a wrinkled shirt, but with a warm smile. "Mark, you look like you haven't slept in a week," he said, shaking his hand. "What happened?" "Lauren," Mark answered briefly, sitting down in the chair opposite the table. "She's cheating. I want a divorce." Jack whistled, leaning back in his chair. "Seriously?" he asked, but did not wait for an answer. "Okay, let's go in order. Tell me what you know." Mark spoke quietly, without unnecessary emotions. About Claire, about the motel, about the photo. Jack listened, scribbling notes on a notepad, and interrupted only once to ask, "Are you sure?" Mark nodded. He was sure, not because he wanted it, but because he could no longer live in ignorance. "Okay," Jack put down his pen. "We can submit the documents today. Division of property, alimony, nothing complicated if she doesn't challenge it." Mark took the pen Jack handed him and signed the papers. His hand did not tremble, but each stroke seemed heavy, like a hammer blow. That was the end. He stood up, shook Jack's hand, and left without looking back. When Mark returned home, the sun was already high. He parked in the yard, got out of the pickup, and froze, looking at the house. Everything looked the same: a neat lawn, a swing under an oak tree, but now it was someone else's house. He took a deep breath and went inside. Lauren stood in the living room with her arms crossed. Her face was tense, her eyes burned with anger. Claire sat on the couch, her gaze darting between them. "Where have you been?" Lauren stepped towards him, her voice sharp. "I returned from my shift, and you weren't there. What were you doing?" Mark looked at her for a long time, silently. Her words sounded like an accusation, but he saw the fear behind them. She knew. "I did what I should have finished when Claire was 12, he said calmly, but every word was hard as nails. "I filed for divorce, Lauren." Lauren froze, her mouth opened slightly, but she didn't make a sound. Claire sucked in a breath, her eyes widened, but she remained silent, clutching the pillow in her lap. "What?" Lauren finally gasped, her voice breaking. Are you serious?" "Yes," Mark nodded, his gaze tired but determined. "I'm tired, Lauren. Tired of pretending that everything is fine. You promised me then that it was a one-time thing. You swore, and now Claire sees you at a motel with some guy. How many were there?" "2. 10. Lauren stepped back, her face pale. "You don't understand," she began, but her voice was shaking. "It's not what you think. I—" "Don't lie to me," Mark interrupted, his tone becoming harsher. "I believed you then because I loved you, because he wanted to save us. But now I see that it was in vain. You don't love me, Lauren. I was just convenient for you, and I don't want to be comfortable anymore." Lauren shook her head, her eyes sparkling with tears, but she didn't cry. "You're ruining everything," she said quietly. "Don't you dare!" Claire jumped up, her voice shaking with rage. Mark raised his hand to stop her. "That's enough, Claire," he said softly. "She knows it's her own fault. She just doesn't want to admit it." Lauren looked at him. Her lips trembled, but she was silent. Mark turned and walked towards the door, throwing over his shoulder. "I'll be with Jack for a couple of days. Pack your things, Lauren. I want you to leave." He walked out without looking back. The door closed and Claire was left with Lauren in the living room. The silence was deafening. Lauren collapsed on the sofa, covering her face with her hands. Mark made his choice, and she knew it was right. But why then did it hurt so much? Lauren sat on the sofa, her face hidden in her hands, and her shoulders trembling slightly. Claire stood opposite her hands clenched into fists, and her heart pounding so hard that she could feel it in her throat. She looked at her mother, at this woman who had just lost everything, and could not find a drop of pity in herself. Only anger is hot, sharp, like a knife. Lauren slowly lowered her hands, her eyes red but dry. She looked up at Claire, and there was something new in it, not cold, not irritation, but rage mixed with despair. "You did it," she said quietly, but her voice trembled with tension. "You destroyed our family, Claire. You could have just remained silent." Claire stepped forward, her breathing ragged. "Did I destroy it?" she asked, her voice breaking into a scream. It was you who destroyed everything. Do you think I wanted to see this? Do you think it was easy for me to tell him? It was you who went to that motel. You laughed with this. With this guy while Dad was waiting for you at home. Lauren jumped up from the couch, her face contorted with anger. I gave you a family, she shouted, her voice cutting through the silence like the blow of a whip. I pulled us out of that hell after Andrew. I worked, I tried. I made sure that you had a home, a father, a life. And you trampled all this. Claire froze, her eyes widening at the words. They hit her like a slap in the face, but instead of pain, even greater rage flared up in her. She stepped closer. Her voice became lower, but every word was saturated with hatred. You gave me a family? She hissed. No, Mom. You stole it from me. You stole Mark, his love, his trust, and used it to cover up your lies. Do you think I don't see who you are? You didn't love him. You just took what you needed. He deserves the best. Lauren gasped, her face turning purple. She took a step towards Claire, her hand flying up as if she was about to strike. Claire didn't back down. She stood looking her mother straight in the eyes, her chin trembling, but there was no fear in her, only defiance. Lauren froze, her hand hanging in the air, her fingers clenching, but she did not lower it. The seconds stretched out like an eternity, and Claire saw a shadow flash in her mother's eyes, maybe guilt, maybe weakness. Don't you dare, Claire said quietly but firmly. Don't you dare raise your hand to me. You've already done enough. Lauren lowered her hand, her breathing heavy as if she had just run a mile. She looked at Claire, her lips trembling, but she couldn't find the words. Claire shook her head, tears stung her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You were never a mother, she said, her voice breaking. You were a shadow. And Mark, he was everything. And you took it from me. Lauren opened her mouth to say something, but Claire had already turned around. She didn't want to hear excuses and didn't want any more words. Her legs carried her to the door on their own. Each step was heavy but decisive. She grabbed the backpack that was lying on the threshold and pulled the door handle so hard that it hit the wall. The bang echoed through the house like a gunshot, and Claire walked outside without looking back. 10 years have passed since Mark left, slamming the door to their house, and Claire followed him, leaving Lauren alone in the empty living room. 10 years is a lifetime, but for Lauren they flew by like a shadow, leaving behind only an echo of what was. She was 42 when it all fell apart, and now, at 52, she looked at herself in the mirror of her small apartment and barely recognized the woman who looked back. Her hair, once dark and thick, had turned gray and thin, the skin around her eyes was wrinkled, and there was something tired but calm in her gaze. She didn't marry again not because she didn't try, but because she realized her heart never let go of the one she lost long ago. Lauren lived alone in a small town, an hour's drive from the home that was once her family. She moved out soon after the divorce, selling everything she could and leaving Mark with his auto repair shop and Claire, her daughter, who didn't want to see her anymore. At first, she tried to fill the void with men. There were short romances with colleagues, casual acquaintances, even with Trevor, the same TB, who became the last straw. But none of them stayed long. They came and went, leaving her with the feeling that she was searching for something that was no longer there. Lauren didn't understand what was wrong until she saw a psychologist. Her name was Dr. Alice Green, a short woman with kind eyes and a voice that was as soothing as warm tea. Lauren found her by chance, through an ad in the local newspaper, and made an appointment almost out of desperation. She was 45 when she first sat in the chair opposite Alice, clutching her purse in her lap and not knowing where to start. Alice did not rush, she simply listened, and with each meeting Lauren began to open up, like an old book that had not been opened for a long time. It took years-long, painful hours of talking, tears, and silence. Alice helped her look where she was afraid to look, into her heart, into her memories, into the part of herself that remained with Andrew. He was her first love, her only true love. Lauren knew it the moment she met him, a tall firefighter with a warm smile and arms that could lift her in one motion. They married a year later, and a year later Claire was born. Andrew was everything to her, her light, her support, her dream. But he left too early, at 27, in the accident that tore her life into pieces. Lauren was left alone with a young daughter and the feeling that the world had cheated her by taking away the one she loved most. Mark came later. He was kind, reliable, 10 years older than her, with those rough hands and quiet voice. Lauren thought she could love him. She tried her best. He gave her stability, a home, a family for Claire, and she was grateful to him for that. But deep down she knew. Her heart never thawed. Mark was like a warm blanket to her on a cold night, comfort, but not fire. She looked for this fire in other men, in short novels, in the arms of Trevor, but every time she realized that there was no one else like Andrew. He was her first love, and his passing left her with a void that she couldn't fill. Alice helped her see this. "You were angry at Andrew for leaving," she said one day, looking at Lauren with a soft smile. "And you were angry at yourself for not being able to let him go. Mark gave you so much, but you couldn't love him the way he deserved." Lauren was silent, her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. It was true. She treated Mark cruelly not because she wanted to hurt him, but because she didn't know how to live differently. She took his love, his care, his patience, but could not give anything in return. And when Claire grew up, when Mark became a real father to her, Lauren felt that her role was over. She was no longer needed, and this pushed her to seek solace elsewhere. One day, 5 years after her divorce, Lauren sat down at the table in her small kitchen and wrote a letter to Mark. This was not a request for forgiveness. She knew that she had no right to it. This was the explanation, the words, that she was finally able to find thanks to Alice. She took the pen, her hand shook, but she began. "Mark, for a long time I could not understand why everything turned out this way. I blamed you, Claire, myself, everyone but the truth. Now I know. The only person I loved was Andrew. You were my stability, my salvation after him, but I couldn't love you the way you deserved. I tried, really. And when it didn't work out, I looked for it in others, but it was useless. I treated you cruelly, and I'm sorry that I realized it too late. Thank you for your love, for your care, for being a father to Claire when I could not be a mother. Please take care of my girl. I know she won't be able to forgive me, and I don't ask her to. Just be with her. You were always better than me. Lauren." She sent the letter without expecting a response. Mark didn't answer. Maybe he didn't want to. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Lauren didn't blame him. She put a copy of the letter in her desk drawer and continued to live, going to Alice, sorting herself out, trying to find peace. But while she was healing her soul, her body began to give out. At first it was fatigue. She chalked it up to age and sleepless nights. Then chest pains, a cough that did not go away. She delayed seeing the doctor, thinking it was a cold, but when she finally went, the diagnosis was like a blow. Lung cancer, already at an advanced stage. She was 47, and the doctors gave her a year, maybe less. Lauren listened to this calmly, without tears. She was not afraid of death. She was waiting for it. Not because she was tired of living, but because she hoped that there, beyond the border, she could see Andrew. Maybe it was the fairy tales she used to console herself. Maybe not. She didn't care. She spent the last months quietly. I went to a psychologist while I could, then lay at home, looking out the window at the gray sky. Her body was weakening, the cancer was eating her up from the inside, but there was a strange peace in her soul. She died at 48 in her apartment, alone, with the window open, through which the cold wind rushed in. She was found by a neighbor, and a day later, that letter lay on the table, a copy that she never put away. Lauren left without making a fuss, but with the hope that somewhere out there, the one she loved most was waiting for her. And maybe he was waiting. Claire returned to college a week after she left home. She graduated with honors, proving to everyone and herself first and foremost that her stubbornness, inherited from Mark, can move mountains. She studied literature, as she had dreamed of, and a couple of years after graduation, she got a job as a teacher at a local university. Her students adored her. She was strict but fair, with a sharp mind and a light humor that made them laugh even at Shakespeare. But her real life began when she met David. David was an engineer, a tall guy with kind eyes and hands that reminded her of Mark just as workmanlike, but soft when he hugged her. They met at a party with mutual friends, and Claire still laughed, remembering how he spilled wine on her and then apologized for half an hour until she said, "Come on, it's just a shirt." A year later, they got married, and Mark was there in the front row in his old suit, which he ironed all night. He led her to the altar, and when she looked at him, his eyes shone with tears not of sadness, but of pride. "You are my girl," he whispered to her, and she hugged him so tightly that she almost tore her dress. 2 years later, Claire and David had their first child, a boy they named James after David's grandfather, but Mark joked that it was in his honor because James sounds like Mark if you say it quickly. 3 years later, Emily appeared a small copy of Claire with her stubborn look and dark curls. Mark doted on his grandchildren. Every weekend he visited them, bringing wooden toys that he carved himself or old cars that he repaired in the garage. James loved to ride in the pickup truck with him, and Emily would sit on his lap for hours while he told her stories about trucks and horses. Claire often joked that Mark was spoiling them. "Dad, did you buy them candy again?" She was indignant when she caught him with 2 children, sticky from chocolate, in his arms. "I'm a grandfather, I can," he answered with a smile, and she could not be angry with him. He was the best grandfather anyone could ask for, and she knew that was his way of loving quietly, reliably, through small gestures that meant more than words. 10 years later, on one of those weekends, they were sitting in Claire's backyard. It was summer, and the air smelled of cut grass, and barbecue David was cooking on the grill. James and Emily were running around the yard, chasing an old ball that Mark had brought from the garage. Claire sat next to her father on a lawn chair, sipping lemonade, and Mark looked at his grandchildren with the same warm smile that she remembered from childhood. "You know," he said suddenly, without taking his eyes off the children, "yesterday I found a letter from Lauren. What she sent a couple of years ago." Claire froze, her hand clenching the glass. She knew about the letter. Mark had told her about it shortly after he received it, but they rarely talked about Lauren. But he didn't say what was in it. "And what?" she asked quietly, trying to keep her voice even. Mark sighed, his fingers tapping the arm of his chair. "She wrote that she loved only Andrew," he said, "that I was stable for her, but not love, and that she realized how cruelly she had treated me. I asked you to take care of you. She said that she knows that you will not forgive her." Claire was silent, looking at the grass under her feet. She didn't feel anger, it had burned out long ago. Just a slight sadness, like a shadow from a cloud. "Did you answer her?" she asked finally. "No," Mark shook his head. "For what? Everything has already been said." Claire nodded, her throat tightening. She didn't forgive Lauren, she couldn't, after everything she'd done. But the thought that her mother died alone, with this pain and awareness, left her with a strange feeling. Not pity, but something close to emptiness. "You didn't have to answer," she said softly. "You did more than she deserved." Mark smiled weakly, but sincerely. "Maybe so," he said, "but I don't regret being with her. Because I have you. And these two," he nodded at James and Emily, who were now trying to climb onto the swing. "That's all I need." Claire looked at him, her eyes sparkling. She reached out and squeezed his hand, rough, warm, so familiar. "You are the best dad," she said quietly, "and the best grandfather. But you definitely spoil them." Mark laughed. His laugh was low and warm, like the hum of a motor. "Let it go," he said. "I told you I can." They sat there for a long time, looking at the children, at David, who was waving to them from the grill, at this little world that they had built together. Mark didn't look for another love after Lauren, not because he was afraid, but because his heart was full of Claire, of her family, of these days when he could just be. Someone could say that he is a weakling, a man who did not fight for a new life, did not look for a replacement. Some might feel sorry for him, thinking that he was simply unlucky with Lauren. But Mark was neither a weakling nor a failure. He was a man who loved as much as he could. Claire knew this. She saw it in his eyes every time he lifted James onto his shoulders or pushed Emily on the swing. She saw it in his hands which mended everything from toys to her broken heart, and she knew that he didn't need anyone to judge him. It is very easy to judge a person when it is not your life, not your scars, not your victories. Mark lived his truth, and this truth was beautiful like a summer day, like the laughter of his grandchildren, like the silence that he found nearby with my daughter. The sun was setting, turning the sky gold and pink, and Claire rested her head on Mark's shoulder. He hugged her like he did when he was a child, and they watched as James and Emily ran toward them, shouting, "Grandpa, let's play!" Mark stood up, smiling, and walked towards them, his steps light, despite his years. The morning was quiet, with a light fog hanging over the fields outside the city. Mark was driving his old pickup truck, his hands on the steering wheel as confident as ever, despite the years. He still looked strong gray hair at the temples, wrinkles around the eyes, but his back was straight and his eyes were clear. In the back of the pickup truck lay a bouquet of flowers, simple white chrysanthemums that he bought from an old woman at the market. They seemed appropriate, clean, modest, without unnecessary pretentiousness. Today he went to her grave, for the first time in 10 years after her death. The cemetery was located on a hill, half an hour's drive from home. Mark hadn't been here since the funeral when he stood to the side, holding Claire's hand while her friend from the hospital made a short speech. He didn't cry, didn't say anything, just watched as the coffin was lowered into the ground and thought that this was the end. But today something called him here, not a feeling of guilt, not a duty, but simply a quiet need to say what he had not said before. He parked at the gate, took the flowers, and walked along the gravel path, his steps crunching in the morning silence. Lauren's grave was in the far corner, under an old maple tree whose leaves were already beginning to turn yellow. The stone was simple gray granite with her name and dates on it. No inscriptions, no angels, just a name and years. Mark stopped, looking at him, and felt something tighten in his chest, not pain, but a slight melancholy, like the wind that runs through the grass. He knelt down, placed the flowers at the base of the stone, and ran his hand along the ground, as if checking that it was still there. "Hey, Lauren," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from the morning cold. "Long time no see." He fell silent, looking at the flowers. The white petals shook slightly in the wind, and Mark suddenly remembered how Lauren once brought home a bouquet of daisies. This was in the early years of their marriage. She put them in an old jar in the kitchen and said, "Just for the mood." Then he smiled, kissed her forehead, and it was one of those moments when he thought they were happy. Now he looked at the chrysanthemums and thought about how things could have been different. Mark sat down on the grass next to the grave, crossing his legs, as if he was going to spend the whole day there. He didn't know where to start, but the words came on their own, quietly, like the thoughts he had been carrying within himself all these years. "You know," he began, looking at the stone, "I thought for a long time about what happened. About us, about how it all ended, and I came to the conclusion that I don't regret anything, even the pain you left me, because this pain brought me to where I am now." He fell silent, his fingers fiddling with a blade of grass. He remembered the day he met her in the cafe, with little Claire clinging to her hand, and she looked lost but beautiful, with that dark hair and tired eyes. He fell in love with her then, almost immediately, although he would not admit it even to himself. She was like a storm that he wanted to tame, and when she said yes to his proposal a year later, he thought it was forever. He remembered how they built a family. He fixed her car. She cooked pancakes on Saturdays. Claire drew pictures that he hung on the refrigerator. This was their time, their little life, and he loved her with everything he had. "I loved you, Lauren," he said, his voice becoming a little louder. "You know that? I did everything I could. I thought that was enough. But my love was not enough for the two of us." He sighed, looking at the maple tree. The leaves rustled, and Mark remembered the letter she sent before her death. She wrote that she loved only Andrew, that he, Mark, was her stability, but not her fire. He didn't answer then, not because he was angry, but because he didn't see the point. But now, sitting here, he thought that maybe he should say something. "You wrote that you loved him," he continued, "and I understand. Andrew was your first, your present. I couldn't take his place, and I probably shouldn't have tried. But I'm sorry you didn't tell me sooner. Maybe things could have ended differently. Not a divorce, not screaming, not a motel. Maybe we could find another way. Mark fell silent, his gaze falling on the flowers. He remembered the day Claire told him the truth, her trembling voice on the porch, her tears, his departure to the garage. It was a blow that shattered his world, but he didn't regret finding out. Because it gave him Claire not just a stepfather and stepdaughter, but a father and daughter, real ones, connected not by blood, but by choice. He remembered how they started again him in his house, she in college, their calls in the evenings, her wedding, the birth of James and Emily. These years were his life, his real life, and he wouldn't trade them for anything. I don't regret it, Lauren, he said, his voice becoming firmer. Even about those years with you, because they gave me Claire, and now she has a family, children, whom I love more than I thought I could. You gave it to me, even if not the way I wanted. But I'm sorry I couldn't give you what you needed, that my love was not the one you were looking for. He stood up and brushed the grass off his jeans. His back-arched years of working in a car repair shop were taking their toll, but he straightened up, looking at the grave. He remembered her betrayals, the one when Claire was 12, and the last one, with Trevor, which ruined everything. It was a pain, deep and sharp, but it had long since subsided, turned into a scar that he bore without malice. He forgave her not in words, not out loud, but in his heart, somewhere in those years when he looked at James and Emily and realized that his life was complete. I'm sorry you left so early, he said quietly. Cancer. It's unfair. I found out from your friend when it was already too late. I hope you have found your peace. Maybe there, with Andrew. I don't know if there's anything after that, but if there is, I hope you're happy. Mark bent down and adjusted the flowers so they lay flat. He stood for another minute, listening to the wind, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of a car on the highway. Then he turned and walked towards the pickup truck, his steps slow but firm. He didn't look back not because he didn't want to, but because there was no need. He said everything he wanted, and now he could go home. As he got behind the wheel, his thoughts returned to Claire, to her children, to their laughter that awaited him every weekend. He smiled weakly, but sincerely. His love wasn't enough for Lauren, but she gave him a family, and that was enough. He started the engine, the truck hummed like an old friend, and Mark drove back, leaving the flowers and the past where they belonged. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.